Connie and I would like to put on the table for you guys today. So, as you know, the theme for today is to check in with everybody about the efforts to commercialize, develop supply chains, generally get the Forever Green portfolio out to the world. And of course, this is interwoven into the Forever Green project in many, many ways. And so I'm sure that everybody is aware of a bunch of aspects of this. But we thought it would be great to just give you guys a little bit of a focused, but also broad view of this effort. And my job is to provide an introduction and to try with my usual abstractions and high-flown concepts to provide an idea of the strategy and the thinking that underlies our efforts around commercialization and scaling. And then Connie and Colin will come in and share some of the particular things that they are doing to try to get leverage and some footholds and generally get us further off the launching pad. So we'll, I think, maybe talk for 45 minutes total, and we'll have some time for discussion. So, of course, the whole point of the Forever Green project is that we're offering these so-called market-driven pathways to diversification in our agriculture. And as you guys know, some key features of our efforts to actually go down these market-driven pathways have to do with a few key ideas and activities. So one of these is the bridging of the different strands of effort, ranging from developing the crops genetically to finding new end uses and lobbying for supportive policy. You know also that this idea of piloting what we're doing via the so-called cluster approach, finding places where we can establish groups of farms that are experimenting and adopting with Forever Green crops so that we can connect with end-use markets and supply chains. One of the main points of this is a sort of de-risking in which the risks of trying to develop these crops are shared among public, private, NGO, philanthropic sectors. And another major point is that we're trying to learn as quickly as we can and follow the famous advice to fail early and often in efforts like this, because little failures are not so costly. And of course, you guys are aware of the activities of Colin and Connie in their respective roles in the commercialization team. And I think this group is very well aware that there's kind of a leading edge of our commercialization activities that addresses KERNZA, it addresses the oil seeds, it addresses hazelnuts, and a few other things. And Connie and Colin will focus in on the things that they are building up, standing up, scaling up day to day in their work with all of you. I would like to take a few minutes to describe the strategic thinking behind what we're doing, to the extent that there is strategic thinking. And that is that we are trying to develop what we are calling a scaling system. And what we mean by this is a intentionally structured system, which is in fact a multi-level partnership, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, that is intended to efficiently move these crops from the very moderate scale of commercialization and adoption into cropping systems out there in the world to higher levels. And to do this efficiently, to fail early and often when we need to, but generally to use what the world has learned about making what are often being called sustainability transitions to guide what we're doing. So let me just introduce you to an important conceptual framework that is guiding this whole effort. And this is what has become known over the past 20 years or so as the multi-level perspective on sustainability transitions, quote unquote. And this is a theory of how change occurs in systems that provide important things to society. So it's been developed a lot around the struggle to develop low carbon and renewable energy, but it applies to water systems, it applies to health systems. It's a very broad kind of concept of the structure of these systems. And it basically says that at any given time, there is more or less effort to come up with more or less radical innovation, which the Forever Green Project kind of is. And that this takes place in what we can think of as niches, little spaces and pockets here and there that are more or less out of the mainstream. And these efforts are always more or less difficult because the existing regime, quote unquote, in other words, established systems, such as our established agriculture here in the Midwest, have, you know, a lot of things that support them and sustain them, and basically create an environment in which the folks in the niches have more or less of a hard time. But all of this is taking place in the context of broader, what we might call megatrends, or what in this jargon is called a surrounding landscape. And this refers to events and driving trends in the broader world, such as consumer awareness of the importance of their food choices in terms of the environment, such as the impending possibility of climate change, such as vulnerability to pandemics, such as the sort of collapse of rural communities in the Midwest. These are all, you know, the kinds of things such as the dead zones we find all around the world and at the bottom of watersheds. So these kinds of situations and changes are what are known as the landscape. And the point is that those events, changes, crises, emergencies, etc., happening in that landscape puts pressure on these established regimes, such as our established agriculture here in the Midwest, and tends to weaken all of the things that stabilize these regimes and make them resilient to change. And these are economic factors, these are social factors, these are political factors, these are all things that stabilize these regimes. However, they get weakened when the overarching world, the surrounding world, puts pressure on something. And our Midwest agriculture is under a lot of pressure, as you guys well know. So that is symbolized in this diagram here, which is a more dynamic version of this multi-level perspective that highlights how transitions occur. And this is, there's a lot of empirical evidence that this is a useful model of how major transitions in these so-called socio-technical systems like agriculture that sustain society occur. So the point is that most of the time we have a stable regime in which we have interlocking, you know, as you can see over here on the left, we have interlocking policy and research support and various cultural factors and a lot of sunk capital and a lot of human capital and a lot of, you know, sort of developed markets and market demand. And all these things, as I just said, support this regime. They keep it locked in and stabilized. They make it very resilient. However, to the extent that the surrounding world is putting pressure on this, at some point that pressure is too great. And meanwhile, the things that have been sort of fermenting in the niches are starting to develop, starting to mature, starting to become viable, like our forever green crops. And that then leads to a dynamic where, and this can occur quite suddenly, and you know, people who have studied the history of this have shown, This can be quite a rapid dynamic. At some point, you reach this tipping point, the regime's stabilization breaks down, and all of a sudden it opens up and reconfigures. So what we're doing in the Forever Green sort of commercialization work is guided by this conceptual model. And we're working both at a niche level to try to get our act together as quickly as possible with these crops and cropping systems and markets and products and infrastructure and so on and so forth. But we're also, and that's a bottom-up approach to driving change, as this arrow symbolizes, but we're also working to try to orchestrate pressure from top down onto the existing, in our case, agriculture that we're working on. So this bottom up and top down strategy is what we are more or less trying to pursue. And so that's the point of the so-called scaling system, this so-called multi-level partnership that we are developing. The essential thing is it's meant to harness top-down strategies for making change and bottom-up strategies for making change. So it's a both and kind of thing. And it's meant to use its multi-level nature to support a bunch of critical things like doing experiments that are public-private partnership experiments, learning as fast as possible, investing in what works. These are all things that this kind of a structure in theory can do. And so the last little bit of concept I want to share with you is that I think I wanted to put on the table for this group that there's actually a whole underlying theory of how we can move towards sustainability that is guiding what we're doing. And the multi-level perspective stuff is part of that, but it's a broader idea. So I wanted to take a second to discuss that. It's the idea of so-called polycentric governance. And so point A is that it's now recognized that polycentric governance, in other words, diffuse power that's held in the private sector, that's held in the NGO sector, that is held by institutions like ours, that is strongly held in the markets and preferences of consumers and all manner of formal government, that all these players have power, that they're, that's the day-to-day reality nowadays. And the challenge is for this shared power to actually be a force for good as opposed to a force for gridlock. And it can easily be the latter. So let me introduce you to the idea of polycentric governance networks and just define them. So there are these multi-level structures of interconnected players. And the idea is that these players, which include all of the parties, the public, the private, government, NGO sectors that I just showed you in the preceding slide, they interact with each other. When you have a polycentric network, they interact with each other. They have some degree of autonomy and independence, but they all, sort of are affected by each other. And in particular, they have power to make rules. They have power to govern within their particular sectors. And for it to count as a polycentric network, they also have to consciously act relationally with each other, to cooperate, potentially to compete, to be in conflict, and importantly, to have ways of working through their difference. So this is, I guess you would call this political science that I'm discussing here. But I think it's a very important idea for this group to have in mind as we think about how we get these crops out in the world. So there is evidence that polycentric networks, if they work well, basically if cooperation trumps competition, then all kinds of good things can happen. They can be capable of accelerating learning and innovation and leading to those breakthroughs that we talked about. They can be inclusive of folks that are often left on the outside as social change occurs. They can respect and integrate all kinds of different knowledge. They're good at matching efforts to make change to the scale of the problem. But they also have many downsides. So they can be very expensive to operate. They can be gamed in various ways by folks who exploit them or take advantage of the efforts of others. They can be co-opted by the powerful. What we call greenwashing is an example of that. And they can certainly be dominated by competition and conflict rather than cooperation. So just a little digression into the concept that is, you know, at the sort of the deepest kind of level of sort of theory underlying what we're trying to do. And a lot of work has been done in the political science discipline trying to figure out what are enabling conditions that maximize the likelihood that polycentric governance will create more good things than bad things. And we're trying to follow these guidelines in what we do. So we're trying, in other words, to achieve all these good things from a polycentric governance structure. And let me just take another couple minutes and explain how this is supposed to work. So the scaling system has 3 distinct levels. And I want to talk about each, and they're all meant to interact in certain ways and to add value to each other in certain ways. So let me introduce them. So the first is a so-called steering council. This is a high-level group that is intended to basically observe that landscape level, right? The driving trends and forcing factors that are putting pressure on, in our case, agriculture, and come up with a public-private strategy for basically dealing with those trends and coming up with a strategy to try to find a win-win for public and private interests, in our case, in developing continuous living cover crops. And then once that strategy is derived, which is, you know, not necessarily a simple thing to do, to pool resources to actually execute that strategy, and also to use the political and social capital of these of folks at this level to obtain more resources. So we have almost recruited this whole bunch of folks, and sorry, I'm just checking into my chats here. We've almost recruited a very interesting and quite diverse group of folks, including environmental NGOs, high-level leadership in those, including some very innovative private sector firms, including NGOs who are concerned with things like the future of rural communities in the Midwest, and folks who are opinion and thought leaders in the whole world of financing regenerative agriculture, for example. And we're now starting to work to figure out what is this public-private strategy in this group. So that's what's happening at the sort of most highly placed, in a sense, part of this partnership. In the middle, we have a group of folks that we're calling the Agricultural Diversification Network. And by the way, we have some support from the state of Minnesota to stand this whole system up. And the basic purpose of this is that this is meant to be a platform where folks who are down in the trenches, who are trying to create the partnerships, trying to get pilot projects out on the ground, trying to conduct field experiments of all sorts, trying to do lobbying and policy work, trying to connect Forever Green to things like drinking water protection and renewable energy, and, you know, generally spending a lot of time down in the trenches doing day-to-day hard work, stuff that Connie and Colin are going to talk about. They need a sort of observatory where they can compare notes, share what's working, and basically make sure that their failures, which are occurring early and often, believe me, are informative. And so there's an important relationship between this middle level and this steering council. These guys, these people, are very high level. They generally know what they want to adapt to, you know, the pressures and changes and forces that they see at their level. They don't know exactly how to get there. So they are capable of sharing their strategic goals with this diversification network. The network, reciprocally, is able to share what it's learning about what's actually working, what these folks up at this higher level should be investing in. So that's a very important two-way interaction. And then finally, we have this whole cadre of folks, and many of the people on this call are, you know, invaluable members of this whole level of effort that we call the crop R&D core. So this is the effort to develop continuous living cover crops in the comprehensive forever green way, and also get them implemented on the ground. And so there's an important interaction between that network of folks and this diversification network. And as I've mentioned, the basic idea is that this middle level platform is something where folks can come up for air from, you know, all of their efforts and share with each other what seems to work, especially as we try to make connections with other sectors in the world, like drinking water protection efforts, renewable energy efforts, et cetera. So this is the whole sort of set of interactions and relationships that is supposed to drive this intentionally polycentric scaling system, this thing that is meant to take that combined top-down and bottom-up approach to making change that you know, is known as the multi-level perspective. So I think that's all I wanted to say, you know, and sorry for kind of going on for a while with this, but I wanted to lay out the framework. And so I'll just mention that we're now standing up this partnership. We have some folks that are supporting or are about to hire some folks to support the steering console and this diversification network with funding we have from the state of Minnesota. And of course, you guys are the heart of this R&D core. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share. And I would be happy to, well, I think it would actually be best to keep flowing here, because I want Colin and Connie to have the opportunity to put their stuff on the table, and then you guys will have the whole picture. And then why don't we circle back and have some discussion? Does that sound okay? Okay, so I'll advance the slide, but maybe I should just stop sharing at this point. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to switch into some stuff from Colin and Connie.
Great, and I'm now going to share my screen. See if this works. All right, you all see my screen? You all have the presentation? Great.
Yep.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to launch in here. Hi, everyone. This is Colin Curitan, a supply chain development specialist with the Forever Green commercialization team. Myself and partner in crime, Connie Carlson, are going to try to walk through as briefly and clearly as possible the progress over the last year or so since you last heard from us. We are coming up on pretty much our 1-year anniversary of this work in its full team function. So that's pretty exciting. And I'm going to speak mostly about KERNZA on the production and supply chain side. You all know there's been a lot of activity on that front. And then Connie will touch briefly on the markets and end uses side of KERNZA, cover most of the winter oil seeds, hazelnuts, and then we'll kind of zoom back out to what we're looking forward to. And I'm going to try to keep my comments to maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So, launching in. Oh, I also wanted to say, I just wanted a note of thanks. I was kind of going through the attendee list here and just kind of calling out some folks on the line that, you know, Mitch in your new role, I see Eric Jackson is on, Peter from FMR, Bill Lazarus has been very, you know, instrumental in the economics of all of this, Tessa and Lee at the Land Institute, our partners at MBA with Jeff Berg, and I think I saw some AURI folks. So that's just a great demonstration of this polycentric, multi-sector team coming together around all this at multiple levels. So that's really fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to start at the seed supply and production stage in the KERNZA world. As many of you know, University of Minnesota's first KERNZA variety was released last summer, 2019, in Clearwater. We released about 5,000 pounds of seed and added a modest 150 acres of commercial production or so, and also released about 60 acres worth of seed to 2 commercial partners through MTAs. Kind of concurrent and prior to that process, 100 acres of Min Clearwater were planted for seed increase in 2018. And I think we can say relatively successfully went through the process of harvesting about 35 to 40,000 pounds of primary product in 2019, got that product transported and aggregated to our seed cleaning partner, and we'll have 20 to 25,000 pounds of seed available for commercial seed and demonstration sites and research sites in 2020. And what that means is conservatively looking at, the potential to add something like 1,000 acres of new KERNZA production in 2020, if we so choose to do that. I think there's some strategy going on there. But that would mean about a 50% global increase in KERNZA acreage. So in the world of crops, 2,000 to 3,000 acres is really not a lot. But when you think relatively, it could be upwards of a 50% global increase just in that first year. In order to keep a handle on all that, we are maintaining very strict licensing terms and have a lot of priorities around that, which many of you have likely seen. And it's just worth noting that at this point, most of the commercial KERNZA seed that's available is available in Minnesota right now, either through the University of Minnesota and private growers also licensed. There's other seed increase efforts going on concurrently. Just kind of calling that out. We were pretty busy last year. We assisted in the coordination of the harvest and processing of about 75,000 pounds of primary product, half of which was destined for the grain market, half of which destined for seed. We have a lot of exciting work going on in partnership with growers around prospective cooperative development, perhaps a KERNZA association. And the current state of play for Minnesota is that about a quarter of all KERNZA production worldwide is in Minnesota. Moving on to supply chain development, some good news to report is that we have onboarded a new seed cleaning and distribution partner. I should note they are not a licensed distributor of KERNZA seed. They are a contracted provider of seed distribution services. But Minnesota Native Landscapes took in all of the Min Clearwater seed, has cleaned, bagged, stored, and has that waiting in Foley, Minnesota, ready to go, and will be distributed on our behalf. There's also been some great movement with a local partner many of you might have heard of, Sprout Labs, which is based in Burnsville, Minnesota. They've been pretty instrumental early on. They're kind of in the craft brew supply chain world. They manufacture micro malting equipment and are reintroducing genetic diversity into strains of barley available for craft brewing. And they saw an early opportunity and really seized it to get involved with KERNZA. So they're now holding the product that was kind of moved off farm by the University of Minnesota and now have that available on an online store available for purchase, both grain and flour, I believe in 1, 5, 10, and 50-pound bags, or maybe 20-pound bags. Connie can speak more to that, but it's exciting. We're not moving KERNZA in suitcases anymore. We have a business that's doing that, and they're seeing some success, and they've already distributed to some commercial partners. Connie's working with them to distribute to prospective product developers. She'll talk more about that. Our partners at AURI have done fantastic work on putting together technical specs on cleaning and dehulling, funded through some of the collaborative LCCMR projects. I'll share that in a bit. And we are currently engaging and vetting what I would say about 3 to 5 seed cleaners and grain processors that are seriously looking at working with KERNZA in 2020 and 2021 moving onward. About 1 to 3 seed companies. I just want to note that I think it's important for everyone on this line to think about whether in KERNZA or other crops. I think it's particularly true for KERNZA that because it's fall seeded, harvested the next year, and then usually not planted until the following year, basically the strategic decisions we make about who to work with and at what level and what acreage. For example, the decisions we make this spring and summer for KERNZA will determine the seed supply and commercial arrangement of plantings in fall 2022. So like, how do we do that well, right? It's tricky, especially things being what they are, but there's some real urgency around this. And on other crop channels, even if you think you're a few years out, the commercial strategy really needs to be addressed early on and in a thoughtful way. And so we're trying to do that as best we can. We have some startup supply chain businesses pursuing investment. I think that's exactly what we want to see, moving from, say, grants to capital is where we want to go, right? Grants are still going to play a big role, but so that's where we're at on supply chain development. So I'm going to take a detour, zooming out a bit, to say we have an exciting development moving forward with a state-funded pilot implementation program. It's the first time the state of Minnesota has directed implementation resources to Forever Green at the level of $500,000, which we have proposed to spend over the next 3 years in supporting the commercial success of Forever Green crops, starting with KERNZA, particular emphasis on maximizing water quality benefits. And we've proposed some strategic payments to growers. You know, my inner economist, it's important to keep in mind, you know, you don't subsidize something to death, but what we're trying to do, as Nick mentioned, is offset risk. We don't think growers should be undertaking 100% of risk on behalf of society. We also think we're prototyping a pretty interesting state model of delivering ecosystem service payments to growers that we know some of those ecosystem services may be, the cost of them may be borne by the consumer, but probably not 100%. So what's the public's role in investing in growers and agriculture for those benefits? And we're also mitigating substantial economic risk, maybe up to half of the cost of production, if growers see a downside loss. So think of it kind of like partial crop insurance. This program is targeted toward 3 areas, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone based on our early efforts on some pilot KERNZA production in southeast Minnesota, central sands, and southwest Minnesota. About half that program is directed towards boosting technical assistance to growers in field and remote. And where things stand with this is the plan has been written and approved by MDA and CFANS. Promotional materials are in development, and we're basically in the process of convening that team to really get this thing launched and out the door, and at least a first run at this in 2020 with expansion in 2021. Okay, moving onwards. And it's important to note that in all of this, there's just been a massive amount of education, engagement, and capacity building across the state, but also nationally. I think I should mention with our Land Institute team on the line, we've taken real, I think, great strides in formalizing our partnership. We have a draft MOU that lays out roles and responsibilities and how we're all working together. On the grower front, Connie and I basically have a constant channel of communication open with growers, probably engaged 150 to 200 growers over the last year. Hosted field days, events, one-on-ones. The prospect of having 150 one-on-one calls with growers is not really feasible. So we've shifted to kind of more strategic approach of, we've now hosted 2 month-long weekly call series with growers upon the announcement of our 2019 and 2020 KERNZA release and seed availability guidelines. And those have been very successful, and I think cultivated just a strong group of growers and partners in this. Concurrent to all this, Connie's been a fantastic media lead. I've never worked on something that has so much just attention from local, some national, even some international press coverage. And I'm gonna go through what the tools we've developed look like, which have been really important in all this. And we've now had over about a dozen conference presentations around the state and some regionally and nationally on KERNZA, but also Forever Green as a whole. So anybody stop me if I'm going too fast here, but I think I just have one more slide. So we're gonna go on a little resource tour. And the purpose of this resource tour is, you know, it sounds like a lot's happening out there, and it really is. You might be sitting there wondering, like, do they just run around talking to people all the time?
Yes.
Well, yes, that's true, but also this work requires a level of, I would say, multifaceted technical expertise that obviously doesn't just live with Connie and I. It's a team effort. But I'm checking my chat box here. Oh, sorry. That has required the development of new tools. And some of those tools are really technical in nature. They might be intellectual property, licensing strategies. A lot of them are economic modeling, which I get excited about. And the reason I want to walk through a few of these is to present to you what a commercialization resource package might look like. If we are prototyping a model for commercializing these crops, what do teams that are on the line need to think about putting together? You know, your strategy might look different if you're exclusively licensing these crops. Maybe that's something the company figures out. But for some of these crops, you know, if we're going to put them out in the world, how do we prepare the world to grow, process, market them, right? So we're going to go on a quick tour. And what this looks like is, let's see here. So I'm going to go out of PowerPoint here, but you know, we have crop enterprise budgets, supply chain models, announcements, detailed announcements that go out, user-friendly versions of those, process flow kinds of charts that our partners are working on for grain processing, decision pathways for licensing, understanding where all of our grain is, and agronomic resources to support growers to do the core work of growing these crops. So I'm just going to show you some of those to give you a sense of what this actually looks like. A lot of you have seen this, but it is the detailed letter we sent out to growers that lays out the detailed licensing and vetting terms. Our call series, we put out an abbreviated version of this, but the point here is that if we're going to launch a new crop, we have to tell people that it's available and what their access to it is, and all of those good things that help them understand from the very get-go, how do they engage with this, what's available, what's not available, and what are the terms. My inner economist, again, in all of this, just wants to point out that markets work well when there's good information, right? So we need to provide good information on these crops. Also, in terms of governance, we need to be really thoughtful about it. I just want to mention, you might all wonder, how do they actually decide like who gets licensed to grow KERNZA? This is the quick visual on what that actually looks like, and also a good representation of why we want to launch this out in the marketplace sooner rather than later. There's actually a multi-step decision pathway between the Land Institute and the University of Minnesota for growers that come in from various geographies and what their priorities are and how we move them through licensing to seed sale to seed acquisition. So that's been developed. We also need to make sure growers have good agronomic resources. A lot of you have seen this, but this is will be annually updated, the approaches to managing intermediate wheatgrass for dual use forage and KERNZA perennial grain production. Lengthy document, very detailed, a lot of partners working on it. We should also understand, where is the KERNZA being grown? So this is all backed by data sets, but some strategies I've been using to create Sankey diagrams to help us understand by germplasm, year of planting, region around the state, acreage, what market it's destined for, and what production system, just to help us visualize and share with partners what's the state of play. Tools like this backed by data that's at least halfway respectable is really valuable. This is a resource put together by AURI, just to let you know that this is in development. We need to support supply chains to understand how to work with this crop. So what is the process flow and the technical specifications that they need to get primary product from the field to, say, a raw agricultural product or food product? So they put this together. It's not public yet, but I'm just kind of sharing that they've done a massive amount of incredibly valuable work on this. So thanks to that team. On the economic side, we should have a good understanding of what's the general, the economics of KERNZA production and supply chains. Last year, I started to get really interested in this and try to take it to a general level of just, okay, how can we understand this? So I'm putting together microeconomic modeling that then informs things like crop enterprise budgets and supply chain models that allow us to take what we know about that crop. And I've tried to be specific about where all my assumptions are coming from, and then develop tools that look at different supply chain types, conventional, certified organic grain, and seed, what we know about dockage and loss in the supply chain, price points to date, different contracting structures, forage pricing from local markets to kick out estimates. These aren't recommended prices, but they are ways of thinking about how KERNZA might be priced and what grower profitability might look like. So this is the kind of tool that growers and supply chain partners might need on other crops. So I think that's the quick resource tour, but I want you all to think about that when it comes to thinking through what do our stakeholders need to actually access, grow, process, build a business around, and market a crop. That's like the base package that we can put out, and then we hand it off to them. So I think I'm at my 15 minutes or so. I'll stop there, and I'm going to pass it over to Connie, who's going to go over market development, product and market development.
And you're just going to flip the slides, right?
Yep.
Good. All right, so getting down into the very tactical work and relational work behind KERNZA, and then some of the additional crops in the platform that we are working on. So I'm just going to go and hit some of the highlights here so that we also allow some time for a question and answer. So you can get some overview of what this work looks like on the ground, working with our partners. Probably one of the most exciting things I think in my work so far is just this collaboration that has been developing between AURI, Food Science, Sprout Labs around KERNZA, and really building out that end use awareness. So AURI is testing the grain up in Northern Crops Institute, running it through malting and brewing and sprouting and puffing, just to understand those end uses. And we'll be taking that information forward to a lot of the partners that we are working with. So, and that will help us expand the marketplace for KERNZA. And what's kind of exciting, and why I am excited about this particularly, is because a number of these groups were either had written grants or were in the process of kind of doing this separately. And so we were able to bring these groups together and collaborate and leverage our work so that we can not only get this done, but then expand on it as well, and build it out and strengthen these collaborations. So, and then with that down the list, a major part of this work is continuing to identify near, mid, and long-term market opportunities for not only KERNZA, but for the whole platform of crops. And initially, before the worldwide pandemic, we were really focused on brewing and distilling because it was an immediate integration of the grain. But we have quickly pivoted and have developed some consumer campaign options that we are working on and that you all will be aware of in probably about a week and a half as we launch it. I am working with somewhere around 30 plus businesses across the upper Midwest of a range of scale. So, you know, small CSA subscription bakers, you know, all the way up to Kellogg's and folks like that. So, and all been identified around end use and interest in these crops. And many times these contacts are coming to us because of the many people who are sitting on this call that Colin called out, who have supported our work from the beginning and have been great about sending us contacts and leads and keeping us apprised of their work and the history of their work. And then I would say some of the core work with me and KERNZA right now is getting sample grain to the long list of folks who have approached us, just like the growers. You know, the growers are interested in getting the seed. We have bakers and millers and the supply chain stakeholders who also want to work with this grain and really haven't had an easy access to that supply until Colin was able to bring on Sprout. And so Sprout Labs and myself, in collaboration with Tech Commercialization, we're able to develop a process for ensuring that we get this sample grain out to the people we want to work with or are working with. And then also gather information on how they're using it, where they might use it, and their experience. So we're seeing some nice early work there. Next. Colin, do you want to talk about this? Muted. Colin, you're muted.
Sorry, I just realized that you could maybe see the chat. I was typing over your slide. That was probably not helpful.
Oh, no, I didn't see anything. We're all good.
So on this, really briefly, just to highlight some work going on in Minnesota that's really exciting in one of those clusters, the Cannon River Watershed Partnership has partnered with the Land Institute and U of M and Imminent Brewing, a brewery right on the main drag and Division Street in Northfield, to host two KERNZA events that I went to both. I was there with Jake. And I just want to emphasize, it was like wall-to-wall packed. People turned out for this. And they were really creative events. The first event, they had 7 home brewers brew up some small batches of KERNZA beer. Attendees voted. Sweet Martha's from famous cookie state fair world made some KERNZA crackers. And they hosted a KERNZA panel with growers, Forever Green representatives, processors, and brewer. And attendees voted on those beers. And then the second event was held concurrent to the area's local water-themed film festival, where Imminent took the winning beer, scaled it to on tap batch, and actually chose to name it Clearwater Revivalt. It was an alt-style ale, and the brewer was jamming out to Creedence Clearwater Revival and heard that we had named this new variety Clearwater. And so like, it's just a great example of how this community has taken this and run with it. Each event had 100 to 150 attendees, community members, growers. I mean, there was probably a dozen growers at this newfangled brewery learning about KERNZA. And our partners there were like, yeah, that doesn't happen a lot. You know, people don't come out to learn about new crops with the St. Olaf and Carleton kids very often, right? But also elected officials, both local and national staffers were there. And I think it was just a great example of how this cluster strategy of leadership, partnership, and really creativity and innovation is bringing this vision to life. I would love if we could see more of this in the future. Go ahead, Connie.
Okay. So moving on to just touch point on some of the other crops, because yes, KERNZA is definitely in the spotlight right now. But the oil seeds have a tremendous amount of potential opportunity and equal amount of energy behind it. And now, and Colin and I have been working pretty aggressively over the last couple months, building out this platform that I think Colin emphasized well with the KERNZA model. So one of the key things we did was just to, very basically ensure that we are connecting with the oilseed team regularly, because their research is moving at a pretty quick pace. And so we have and are working on, we have coordinated quarterly research update meetings. The next one is in early May. And it's a place where all of the research comes together. We specifically talk about what's happening, but then also as a team, strategize about what it's going to look like going forward. What are the opportunities happening? Who are we connecting with? And how do we capitalize on that? And like KERNZA, we are identifying those and exploring and researching those existing markets for these crops. So there's a tremendous amount of interest around proteins. We've seen an upsurge in interest in bioplastics from a number of companies. Food grade oil is always a focus because of the premium in the market. And then pet food, we are hearing a lot about, because again, that's a market that can command a premium as well. So there's a lot of options for those oil seeds, and as always, it's a matter of us continuing to keep our eyes on it, identify the partners who we want to work with, and continue to understand how we integrate into that market. And some of the partners that have been guiding us on this or have expressed interest are Cargill, Kellogg, Danmer is another one. And what's exciting when we talk to these companies is that they're coming to us because of that sustainability, ecological services that Forever Green is promising. They find that incredibly valuable, and it's a launch point for developing these partnerships. One key strategy for the winter Camelina that we are deeply involved in right now is looking at the grass status, generally regarded as safe, which will allow us to move Camelina into the food market, Camelina oil into the food market. And we have partnered with AURI and a few others on building that out. And then, of course, one of the key places where we like to communicate about the oil seeds is in our field days, which is where this picture of Riley from AURI comes from. Go ahead, Colin. Some other additional places where we are working, we are integrated in the I Prefer AFRI SASCAP. So Colin and I sit in that work. And in fact, we have a meeting right after this where we're looking at LCA and TEA options in that grant process. We are highly involved with the Plant Protein Center, attending meetings, and though that has been, the PPIC program has been valuable to our work on these crops, in that it allows us to intersect with industry, and not only that, but to really understand the trends that are driving plant protein right now. So that's been an invaluable resource. We work closely with tech commercialization on a whole range of things, and from MTAs to contracts to NDAs, but also they already have a lot of established relationships with these companies like Cargill and Kellogg. And so they are a resource for us to go to understand what the current strategy of the university is and how we might be able to plug into that as well. So leveraging those existing relationships for this work. And like Colin said, there's been a lot of media, and there continues to be a lot of media growing for the oil seeds as well. You can go ahead. And Colin, you want to talk about Nutrien?
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, so briefly to another highlight, I'm like the highlight guy in this section. So we have a rapidly emerging winter Camelina pilot supply chain project in the works, where we have an industry partner that reached out via Russ Gesh, I believe, and a few other folks. AURI kind of landed on our plates, which I think is a good sign that our jobs are functioning a bit as they should. That Nutrien Ag Solutions is interested in piloting about 1,000 to 2,000 acres of pilot commercial production of winter Camelina this fall in southeast Minnesota. Kind of smack dab right in the middle of one of those prioritized areas for forever green acreage expansion, forever green crop acreage expansion. And that site was kind of what you might say serendipitously chosen based on a nearby crush facility, but it's just an exciting overlap in terms of water quality benefits and concentrating our environmental and economic footprint in one location. They're looking at having winter Camelina follow sweet corn or canning peas, and then being relay cropped into soy, which there's a lot of activity now in discussing the agronomics of that. That acreage reflects, just to give you a sense of how quickly the oil seeds can scale, that acreage reflects the forecasted minimum yield just to get in the door. And then if the oil seeds are really going to commercialize, you know, I think the best way to think about this is like exponential functions have become a lot more relevant in all of our lives. So that's very true for the oil seeds. I don't think growth for a lot of these crops, but especially the oil seeds, will be linear. We're not going to go from 2,000 to 4,000 to 6,000. It's going to be 2,000 to 20,000 to 200,000. And so the question is, are we prepared for that? Obviously, there's a lot of, speed bumps along the way, detours, etc. But we need to be thinking at that kind of scale and how we're going to prepare for that. And so far, I think we've been a very valuable resource to them. It's basically a hub of resources and expertise. We've connected them to a seed source, which we were able to track down, provided them best information available on cost of production, counsel on contract pricing. We want to make sure this launches at a profit for growers. Really brought to bear the agronomic expertise, TA, and resources of our agronomy team.
And I'll jump in and just say that Alex, Russ, and Scotty, they're planning on doing some in-field labs to help these farmers. So they're highly integrated into this work. Yeah,
it's very much a team effort. Like a lot of things, Connie and I are playing a coordinating role, but it's a very strong team effort. And on that note, activating our partner network to seek that same level of de-risking support. You know, we have the pilot implementation program targeted at KERNZA, and we're very thoughtfully trying to bring on, say 1,000 acres of KERNZA over the next 3 years. Well, here comes a winter Camelina opportunity to go to 2,000 acres right now in one specific area. So how do we de-risk that in the same way with some flexible resources? And they're doing this, I should note, because they see multiple potential end users, including a potential Camelina-based PHA biopolymer product, but also they're getting enough signals from their buyers that they think they are willing to undertake some risk, maybe not all of the risk, but some risk to determine whether they can profitably and logistically grow at a commercial scale, even a small commercial scale, winter Camelina. And our job is to support them to make that happen. And if they succeed, I think it really opens up like a lot of this work, is very high risk, right? If they succeed, it bodes well for us. If it fails, you know, we're not dead in the water, but it's a challenge, right, moving forward. So that's an exciting pilot underway. Back to you, Connie.
All right, so hazelnuts, I'll just go very briefly over this, but I've been involved with the hazelnut work since I started with RSDP, and it's, and I just, Colin knows this, I love this crop. And since that time, you know, in the 4 years I've been here, the movement forward in this crop has been very exciting to watch. And so both Colin and I are integrated into the existing teams that have been involved in this crop for a long time. And we're seeing the growth multiply right now. The two pieces on the right side are some recent feasibility and a work that's being done around building out the industry. Jason Fischbach is very committed to developing a council that brings together a lot of the stakeholders we've mentioned already, but additional industry that might drive the hazelnut work forward. So we're involved with that. Both of those pieces are available on the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative website, which is becoming a very much in the same way that KERNZA.org is. It's a platform for all of the research and partners around hazelnuts. And you can go to the next slide. And I think what I'll highlight in this work is because of that SCREE grant that Lois and the team were able to get, we're really going to be taking this crop forward in an exciting way. Nick talked about the cluster work. Colin has exemplified the KERNZA cluster work, and that same type of work is happening with the hazelnut growers. In February, the teams with the SCREE grant launched early convenings with growers across the Upper Midwest to start building out and sharing good information to help growers start working with us in a strategic way to get more hazelnuts on the landscape. And one of the key recommendations that has come out of that work is that we're encouraging growers to plant some early plots of hazelnuts so that they can get experience with the crop and start building out some pollen clouds. So then when the university, when the research material, the new germplasm comes out, we have some experienced growers who know how to grow hazelnuts and also are communicating and connecting with each other. So we build out these clusters that can develop, that can aggregate and ensure that we can develop some efficient supply chains as well. So you can go to the next slide. And as many of you are probably aware, there have been products out there already that are using hazelnuts grown in the Upper Midwest. And we've been working with the American Hazelnut Company on this for a few years. And the interest continues to grow, and we have brought on even more products. Bakersfield Flour is using the hazelnut flour regularly in scones and other desserts. There's an ice cream company called Loves that is working on a hazelnut spread, and we continue to secure interest from restaurants and co-ops who are putting these products on their retail shelves. Next slide. So it's not just, you know, hazelnuts and camelina that we have seen some uptick in interest and momentum for elderberries and perennial flax as well. So Christopher Patton, who is part of the Midwest Elderberry Co-op and has been driving that work forward for many years, sent out an email about a week or two ago that said that the elderberry crops are sold for 2020. And part of that is this growing consumer awareness, and part of it is what we are going through right now with the pandemic. So it's very interesting how these markets are influenced and sometimes by things that we cannot predict at all. So what's exciting is that we are able to, we are nimble and we are able to capitalize on these things. Just I'll point out as a highlight that there was a SCREE grant that was submitted in the last month that will, like the Hazelnuts SCREE grant, ensure that we're building that teamwork, multi-state, and it's again a grant that Colin and I sit on and will be supporting with market development and supply chain work. And then perennial flax, I'll just say that this is an exciting crop to be working on because of the different market channels. The ornamental channel, which Neil Anderson has expert command on, will be exciting to watch and see how that that moves forward. But we're also looking at perennial flax for that egg production. And one of the key activities in the upcoming year is actually working with organic growers to who have flax experience to build out that crop production. Next slide. I take it. Do you want to skip that other one? Or did I? Oh, never mind. I saw a flash of something. Anyway, okay. So getting to the end of it, this is what I'm looking forward to and what we're working forward on the market development. And Colin will also pipe in with his input. But I think one of the key pieces to keep in mind is that our work is really communicating the breadth of the Forever Green platform. And I think you really get an understanding of that after looking at all of these slides and seeing how it's not just KERNZA, it's working on that entire platform and encouraging, the people that we intersect with to understand that our work is this whole platform of crops and tools. And so over the next years, as we develop these communication points, our work will more and more encompass this idea around Forever Green. And not just KERNZA, not just winter camelina, not just hazelnuts, but how does this whole platform come together? I'll continue to be identifying industry partners as we have been, and really quantifying, the market value and demand for these crops from industry partners. And lastly, having tangibles on the market so that we can continue to point to the work that's being done, and that there's ways for the consumer, that end user, to support this work, learn about this work, and get excited about it. So on the left side, I'll just leave it with the sprouted KERNZA crackers that we got back into circulation. And then hopefully I'll be able to send a message out to all of you in the next, 6 months, to invite you to a tasting, to a Tattersall KERNZA whiskey tasting. So stay tuned on that. That's the gentleman from Tattersall in the lower left. So I'll pass it on to you, Colin.
Sure. So what I'm looking forward to is essentially over the next year to 2 years, really seeing where the rubber meets the road with KERNZA acreage increase and supply chain expansion, having these partners starting to work with one another directly. I think the university has been, and the Land Institute and others have been really valuable broker of commercialization. But the way I think about a lot of this work is that, we're a bridge, or maybe, we're fording a river and we need to get across the river. And if we stay in the middle, those complexities of doing commercialization through, say, a big research institution is a lot more challenging than, say, startup businesses specifically staking their business profitability and name on these. So I'm really excited to see that all take shape and see what it looks like. And to that end, I'm just excited to see some of these innovative business models take shape. So one grower in particular, I should mention, has now written, I think, 8 different short white papers on the importance of approaching the business side of these forever green crops with the same level of innovation and intention of, say, germplasm and agronomic development, or the innovation of the governance model that Nick laid out. So if we have polycentric governance of perennial grains, can we just plug that into the same marketing structure? Probably not, right? So what's that actually going to look like? I'm really excited to help co-create that with all of you. I'm excited to see whether this pilot winter camelina project flies and what its results are. I'm excited for the new commercialization channels opening up with pennycress, hazelnuts, perennial flax, elderberries, and others. I'm interested in what we can do to connect these crop platforms to what you might think of as production supply chains and markets for those ecosystem services themselves. So you probably know about NORI, the Ecosystem Services Consortium, Marketplace Consortium. Ecosystems have been delivering ecosystem services as long as we can remember, but agriculture became products when there were markets for them, right? So now markets are emerging for those goods, and how we can plug our crops into emerging markets for, say, carbon sequestration and other ecosystem benefits, I think are really important to stack those benefits, whether it's a state policy program, whether to find that model that Nick laid out for how, for lack of a better word, how this happens. That contextual factor placing pressure on all this, before all this economics and policy stuff, I will admit to you all, I was actually a history major of all things. So you have a humanist over here running some commercialization work, but a little detour into history suggests that the last major wave of crop commercialization around, say, soybean and even canola started with the geopolitical shock of World War II, right? So our supply chains for oils were interrupted in the South Pacific, which resulted in massive investment in new oils and proteins. So we could all name a couple major geopolitical shocks in the immediate, mid, and long range that are in many ways fostering all of this. So I'm excited to work that through. And then I'm excited to see how these crops can have multiple lines of activity on different FGA crops. So I'm going to walk you through a little play-by-play of how I can see that happening in the most idealistic world. We have these areas of KERNZA production, our target ones. We know there's some production up in Roseau. And then, oh, here comes the pilot in Camelina. And then say that goes well and we're ready to go behind wheat in western Minnesota. Hazelnuts come online with a couple clusters. Jason has also talked about the Minnesota River Valley. And then perennial flax, there's also production in western and northwestern Minnesota that we might be able to add on to. And then Catherine, David, and Ratan have assured me that a pennycress is just going to take over, right? So we can have that across the landscape in our corn and soybean agriculture. Winter camelina will not be outdone, and they will have their accompanying soy germplasm. So they'll come right behind them. And so obviously there's a little bit of embellishment here. This is a best case scenario, but I'm kind of walking through really what the next 5 years could look like in terms of kind of more dotted across the landscape, not these huge areas, but it's quite exciting to see where all that overlap is. So I'm excited to see that. I think our last two slides are just to say that we are leveraging substantial funds going after a whole range of resources. I don't know if Nick, you want to mention this or you want me to close it out or what?
I think that'd be fine, Colin. Yeah.
Okay, this is just to say that we're doing all that concurrent to trying to participate as a team, lots of other people to bring in more resources, some of which have been allocated, some of which are pending. We are on the hook for short-term and long-term market opportunity and supply chain assessments for leading edge crops. And those are in development. And I think a lot of what you heard today is the underlying work that's going to make those actually impactful and detailed. And that's it. I think we have time for questions, maybe 15 minutes in discussion.
We are driven to discover.
Good job, you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, a lot of good work.
This is really exciting. Really exciting.
I agree.
Any straightforward questions for the group in terms of any of the projects and timelines for the future or anything like that?
Not that we'll give straightforward answers.
Right.
Oh. Yeah, right.
And I just wanted to say one word as Nick was going through and laying out the new model. I just wanted to make it clear to everyone that is the proposed model for the Forever Green partnership and how it's going to function into the future. Nick, I think, is going to come back later in the semester and actually talk about more of the details of the new partnership model. But what he laid out today was basically the philosophy behind that new model for evergreen. In other words, moving beyond the Forever Green initiative as we have understood it in the past in terms of the 15 new crops under development, but basically now connecting this top-down, bottom-up framework for this for the new partnership.
Yeah, that's a good point, Don. Thanks for bringing that up. And the way that I kind of think about it is, you know, those kinds of construction projects where you build a larger building around an existing building. That's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build this additional structure around all of the amazing activity that is associated with this this group of 15 different crops and the work that is intensely underway with each of those crops. So we're trying to build like this second story, so to speak, around that. And even though in my slides I called it a, quote, scaling system, Don is absolutely right. We're also calling it the Forever Green Partnership. And we're starting to try to distinguish that from what we think of as the core crop R&D, and to sort of use that term to as the Forever Green initiative. So this is sort of like Forever Green 2.0, I guess, that we're talking about. I don't know if we've arrived at the perfect name for it, but we're calling it the partnership at this point to signify that we're expanding into this very broad and active public-private partnership, basically.
And what's the I don't necessarily want to say timeline, but is this something that's going to be rolled out very soon? Is this something that's still kind of cooking into years in the future and in development? Like, what's the kind of vision moving forward for this rolling out?
Yeah, great question. So we have funds that were granted last year through the support of the Clean Water Council to start constructing this partnership thing with these multi-levels and stuff. And so we have been meeting every other week for like 2 hours for months.
Wow.
To build this thing up.
For 2 years.
Getting along pretty good in the process. And we have recruited a very interesting group of 10 people or so who will be that strategic steering council. And we're still trying to recruit a couple other people, but we are actively scheduling the first meeting of that steering council to get going on working out that public-private win-win strategy, or so we hope. And we are also working to recruit core participants and convene that middle level platform. Jess, so this is all stuff that, you know, we really need to show the state of Minnesota that thanks for giving us all this money to do this, and okay, we are now generating ROI. So it's important, you know, to get the show on the road.
Cool. Thank you.
So Jess, it will all be rolled out within the next 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So we basically got approval from the Department of Ag and from the college that this, as what Nick described today, you know, as the overview, there is in fact some details that are now laid out in terms of how it's going to operate. So I think Nick is actually is scheduled later in the semester to actually walk through more of the details of that later in the semester. Right.
Wow, that's exciting.
Nick, this is Eric. Can you hear me?
I can. Hiya.
Hi. So, you know, when Colin was putting up those consent or those sort of heat map circles and shapes on the map, you know, sort of where my head goes to is as an infrastructure or supply chain guy. I wonder when do you start dropping sort of the physical pins, you know, that honor all that work you've done, or do you see that being a targeted type activity or more of an opportunistic sort of evolution for the first stage before it goes full commercial? You wind up going through 2 or 3 kind of steps to get there, right? And every one of them takes increasingly larger amounts of infrastructure. And do you see that evolving as a opportunistic exercise, or do you think that it's safe enough, so to speak, to say, you know, in a perfect world, here's a place we would like to be as an early stage development in the infrastructure towards full scale commercialization? And you know, from a perfect standpoint, obviously you'd leverage multiple crops in a location if that were possible, but sort of going beyond the ORI environment into next step, I guess would be the way I think about it. Is that still too far out in the future? Or because those of us like myself who are in the commercial world, you know, we see assets go by our window literally daily, and I think that's just going to continue to increase, partially due to the financial strain in farm country. But you know, if we had an idea of the geography, you know, within reason, we could start thinking about putting some of that together for the next level of growth.
Well, my quick response, and then I'll let Connie and Colin weigh in with that, Eric, is that we feel like we have 3 parts of the state of Minnesota where we are trying to develop what Colin described as multi-crop clusters. And so in that southeast Minnesota part of the world that was circled, we have an active KERNZA effort going. We are trying to, well, Colin mentioned the winter Camelina. We are also trying to couple some grain production that I think is the sort of thing that we absolutely want to talk with your firm, Eric, about. And we're trying to get some economies of scope essentially established in that situation, to where we have enough people talking, enough people thinking, enough people making efforts that we can attract balanced investment, you know, so some private investment, but with some public support to that to some extent. And in other words, create a situation where there's enough of a there that private sector players can start, like you say, putting some physical pins on the map. So I don't know if that responds to what you're asking, but that's what I'm thinking.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I've got a bunch of ideas. It's too long to go into here, but that's helpful, Nick. I appreciate it.
I would follow up by saying that I think in the first wave of those, you know, you said you have to go through 2 of these steps. It's kind of a combination of opportunism and strategy. We have to have someone who's willing to take the risk. And in this case, it's great that a few of those are, say, co-located in Southeast Minnesota. And as we've worked with them, like we kind of, even though they're at a very small scale, we kind of intentionally chose Sprout Labs on that KERNZA front because they're very nimble. I should have mentioned things like they're incorporating as a B Corp. They're using open source blueprints to build their own equipment. Like my experience in a lot of this specialty crop processing is the new guys buy the old guys' equipment. Well, they're circumventing that whole thing, which is very interesting. And they're looking at data science approaches to maximizing yields from grain quality in terms of what they're able to use and technologies like that. So it's very interesting stuff. And then in the case of Nutrien, you know, they're willing to go for it. And conveniently, they're looking to co-locate in a certain area. But one of the challenges we have that oftentimes your early adopter growers are not magically like in the perfect places you wish they were. So you kind of have to deal with that. But I would say in steps 2 and 3, if we can manage a combination of opportunism and strategy, we can move much more intentionally to strategy. And I think there's a level of ground truthing that says, can we grow winter camelina? Can we grow KERNZA and move it in the marketplace? You know, all these ideas and spreadsheets are great, but it's all, you know, when the rubber meets the road, can we make it fly is the question. And moving from there, like we have growers right now that really want to understand that. They're asking for detailed market research on what is the demand for these crops, like any other agricultural commodity.
Right.
And that's the step we're moving toward in partnership with those growers and businesses.
Right. Yeah, that Southeast area is very interesting for us.
Good.
We've got that cluster of, we've got our own cluster, right, between Hope and Ellendale and Blooming Prairie. And not all of those assets are fully deployed, and you know we're in the process of probably disassembling an oilseed crushing operation in Missouri and either parting it out or, you know, quite frankly, it could be moved up. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about here, probably in a relatively short period of time. So we'll take that offline and
Good.
follow up on that.
Great.
Good.
Thanks.
Any other last comments or questions, input?
Well, I have a question. So this kind of has to do with the current COVID-19 climate. So brewing and distilling was mentioned. Many breweries and distilleries are converting their production towards hand sanitizer.
Yep.
So I was wondering if KERNZA is a part of these supply chains, and similarly, oilseeds, pennycress, and camelina can be converted into soap. And so is there any discussion about this with companies like Unilever or others in the supply chain?
Before anyone answers, Jason, where are you at?
I'm in Nebraska right now,
Oh, yeah.
but I did get a postdoc position at the Carnegie Institution for Science at Stanford, which is where I'll be once this COVID situation clears up.
You made it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
That's great, Jason.
Yeah.
Good. It's a little bit more of a market question, but I think I'll preempt it from the production side to say that these crops are so new in development that they're not at a production scale that they're putting out, you know, today, right now, product of any significant quantity, focusing on their primary intention, much less able to pivot really rapidly to a sort of pandemic response approach. The network of people working with, like the Artisan Grain Collaborative, is doing fantastic work in responding to the pandemic, and some of the businesses on their traditional distilling side are engaging in that, but I think it's unlikely that we would see in the short term a sort of application to rapidly grow out a supply. Like right now, we're trying to build a reliable supply of, say,
Exactly.
3 or 4 of these crops. You know, this is all, it's so much of what Connie and I do is kind of pre-market in the sense in that it's setting these crops on a path to market success. Now we kind of have to live in the future. It's interesting. So that's my quick response.
Yeah, and I'd echo that, especially around the supply and there's a little bit of a dance that we're doing right now with some of those partners to check in with them to see how they're doing, what support they might need in these unusual times. And then as some stability happens, kind of renew some of the conversations that we were having. But again, supply is a big concern for these new crops. And so it's hard to integrate them at this time into some of that COVID work.
Yeah. Don,
I have to run, everybody.
Time. I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank everyone on the line for being really excellent partners in all of this. I mean, I think Connie and I bring a sort of a different skill set to the work, but really oftentimes we're just brokers of relationships, opportunities, and information. And so we, in a sense, like your expertise is the thing we're brokering, right? So, you know, you've been great so far, but keep that up. And, you know, we can't make things happen if we don't know what those opportunities are and that kind of thing. So keep us in the loop and keep us on the agenda, as I'm sure you will. But all this is kind of predicated on really just timely and thoughtful communication. And so thank you for that. And thanks in advance for its continuation.
Okay, thanks everyone. Take care and stay healthy and continue to wash your hands.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.